Now, I'm a big space nerd, all right? You guys familiar with New Horizons? New Horizons is the spacecraft that they sent to Pluto to look at it. Like they sent that to Pluto, and that's the fastest spaceship that we have ever sent. You know how fast it was going? It was going 36,000 miles an hour. It still took 10 years to get to Pluto, right? 36,000 miles an hour. Now here's the next baffling thing. The next solar system that's closest to us, if we were to go there, it's 36 light years away. The next closest one. If we sent New Horizons, which is the closest, the fastest thing that we have, to that other solar system that's 36 light years away, do you know how long it would take it to reach there? 170,000 years. Yeah, right? 170,000 years to the next closest star to our sun. Whenever you are feeling too big for your britches, think about that for a second. And then also think about what they did with Hubble. What they did with Hubble, the space telescope, they pointed it at a blank part of the sky. They pointed at a blank part of the sky where there was no stars, and they held the shutter open. And you guys familiar with photography, you get more and more light open there. And they held it open. And when they closed the shutter and processed the image, there were thousands of galaxies in that spot that we couldn't see that there was anything in a pinprick. Again, I stress, when you are feeling too big for your britches, remember that. I have a close personal friend that has anxiety about space, and I can see why. Because you can't comprehend something that big. It's unsettling. It's uncomfortable. And Job has been complaining. It's like, you are not acting injustice towards me, God. And right when God answers back, he answers back with this. Then the Lord answered Job out of a whirlwind. Out of a storm he answered Job. Who is this that darkens my counsel with words without knowledge? I feel like one of my parents said that to me at one point. Who darkens my counsel with words without knowledge? Dress for action like a man. Like, buck up, Job, right? Be a man. I will question you and you will make it known to me. Have you entered into the springs of the sea or walked in the recesses of the deep? Have the gates of death been revealed to you? Have you seen the gates of deep darkness? Have you comprehended the expanses of the earth? Declare if you know all of this, Job. And then God asks Job 70 questions. 70 questions. Some of you may be really into biblical numbers. And 7 is a very important number, so is 10. And that's kind of a multiplier there. 7 times 10, 70. And it means completeness. But God asked Job 70 questions. That is not an accident number. Right? That is not an accident number. This book is a display of how God has all of this control over everything. But we see that God speaks out of a whirlwind, out of the storm. And I have a quote from a theologian, a Lutheran theologian, one of my professors in the seminary. He said this. He goes, "This is our truth for the day. Instead of an explanation from God, we receive a revelation from God. God finally speaks. Out of the thunder, God speaks. In the middle of the storm, God speaks. To the father who holds a rose taken from his son's coffin, God speaks. To the wife who holds a flag taken from her husband's casket, God speaks. To the couple with a barren womb and fervent prayers, God speaks. To any person who has tried to see God through shattered glass, He speaks. Our God speaks in the storm, and His voice thunders with majesty, power, and authority. The name of that theologian is Reed Lessing. And I was amazed at his quote about Job there, that he speaks in the storms of our lives. And he's basically saying, Job, who are you to question me? Who are you? Are you big enough? Were you there when I formed the earth? Were you there when I made the lions and the lambs? Do you understand all these things? Or in other words, Job, your perspective is limited. You don't know all this stuff. You're not in a position to say whether or not I'm just. Job needs to let God be God. There is a God and we are not Him, right? You know, we all have a limited perspective. We all see, to quote Paul in the New Testament, we all see through a glass dimly. Like we barely are able to function with everybody in this room, right? And there's only 120 of us in here. Like we don't know what happened to someone when they were younger. We don't know what someone's experience was on the way in here. Like that's, and yet we try to make these judgments about everybody. And huge, trying to understand, and our perspective is inherently limited. When New Horizons went to Pluto, they thought Pluto was like our moon, geologically dead, just a cold rock floating about, right? Revolving around. That's what they thought Pluto was. But when they went by it, they found out that Pluto is amazingly geologically active. That there are volcanoes on Pluto. But it's not volcanoes like we have that are like hot magma, like flying out in Hawaii, right? It's ice volcanoes. They have ice volcanoes. I have a couple of pictures of Pluto here. But they have these ice volcanoes all over. That's one of them that shoots ice way into the atmosphere because Pluto is so small and its gravity is so little. You know, they didn't understand these things until they saw it. And there's so little that we understand, even about ourselves and the people that are sitting next to us. We have a limited perspective, just like Job. One of my favorite things, and it's in Job chapter 38, verse 31, is God asks Job, could you move Orion's belt? Now, this is what I love about that quote, because they at that time, they believed the earth was flat and there was a dome and there was little pricks in the dome and God's glory was shining through them. That's what they thought. But they were thinking, Job, you can't jump high enough to move Orion's belt. But that still has meaning for us today. Because even if we are able to navigate through all these galaxies and go to all these stars that are hundreds of light years away, that we're able to do that, I don't know if we'll ever, I'd love to be proved wrong on this, I don't know if we'll ever be able to move Orion's belt. You know? That would be quite the engineering endeavor. You know? And there's some quite amazing engineering endeavors. Do you know that at one point they thought about draining the Mediterranean Sea? Have you guys ever heard about that? It's true. Look it up. It was one of the Axis powers. It was one of Germany's big projects if they had won the war. Like they were going to drain the Mediterranean Sea so there could be more farmland. Right? Like that's a huge engineering endeavor, but moving Orion's belt might be a smidgen bigger. It might be a smidgen bigger. I know some of you are like, he is joking about that Mediterranean. No, I'm not. That was a plan. It's a weird plan, but it was a plan. They were going to dam up the... yeah. So, but it's amazing. And God keeps on saying, it's like, your perspective is limited. Like about suffering, why things happen, about why this prayer was answered or not answered. Our perspective is limited. We're just not in a position to be able to do that. And we see Job's response to all of this. He says, "Behold, I am of small account. What shall I answer you? I lay my hand on my mouth. I've spoken once, I will not answer. Twice, I will proceed no further." What am I to do? What am I to do? He's like, Job, I think, is starting to realize that he's the water boy telling LeBron James how to dribble a basketball, right? Job is starting to realize that he's the bat boy telling Babe Ruth how to hit a home run. Or he's the caddy that's telling Tiger Woods how to use a 9-iron. Job is the clay telling the potter what to do. Job's perspective is too small. And sometimes in the midst of our suffering, our perspective is too small too. I think I said sometimes, let's just say it, like our perspective is too small even in the midst of our suffering. Our perspective is too small. But God turns things around. He starts turning things around, and after Job talks here, God starts talking about these two amazing beasts, Behemoth and Leviathan. Right? Now, when I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia, and everyone in Atlanta is half Baptist. That's just the way it goes, all right? That's just the way it is. And I was homeschooled, so I was one of those people. You guys get it, right? Like that's the I was one of those and all that stuff, and I was drug around to various like conventions and things like that, and this one convention that I was taken to, they were like, "Did you know that dinosaurs were mentioned in the Bible?" And I'm 9, and I'm like, dinosaurs are cool. I was probably actually 15, but we won't talk about that. We'll say I was 9. And I'm like, dinosaurs are awesome. Like that's, and they're like, yeah, Behemoth and Leviathan. Like Behemoth is like a brontosaurus, huge tail, like massive, like big neck, and like eats reeds, strong stomach muscles. And then Leviathan is like that dinosaur that's in the ocean. I can't remember the name of it right now, but that was like, that's how it was sold to me. And I look back at it now after studying Job, and it trivializes these monsters so much. It trivializes them because God starts talking about them, and he says, Job, can you tame Behemoth? Or are you scared whenever he's just around? And the thing is God almost has this sense of pride about this huge beast, this huge creature. And then after he finishes talking about Behemoth, he talks about Leviathan. And Leviathan is a very interesting creature here in Job because God spends between a quarter and a third of everything he says, he's talking about Leviathan. It's not just a little bit about Leviathan. Like, it's so much about Leviathan. And you guys are familiar with Leviathan, right? Have you ever heard of him before? Like it's this creature from the sea, from the depths, from this down deep, and it's very fearful. Like, think of a sea monster. Like idea. And I think a lot of times when we get in our heads, we're like, oh, these ancient people, them and their sea monsters, they're just crazy, right? They don't make any sense. Sea monsters don't exist anymore. But that's the problem, is that we're really cool with sea monsters not existing until we're floating out in the ocean. Right? We're like, yeah, sea monsters don't exist until we get in that murky lake, right? And you're like, this lake's probably really deep. I'm sure there's like a giant catfish monster that's going to come and eat my toes off, right? Like that's like maybe I'm alone in that, but I've had enough conversations with people that when I'm in a lake, like I'm trying to keep it cool, right? But I'm treading water as shallow as I can, right? Like that's I'm trying to I still got you can't see what's going on below the surface. But I'm just like, nope. I'm like, I got the life jacket on. I'm treading water as shallow as I can. Like, I'll dive off the boat into the water, and it's like, oh yeah, I'm big and bad. I dive in, but as soon as I get under the water, I'm like, right back up, right? Not spending any extra time down here in these murky lakes with giant sea monsters and Leviathan. And I think the reason why I feel that way, and I have a feeling you're right there with me, is that there's something deep, innate inside of us, that there's something scary in the midst of the waters. And that's something that has held inside of us all for years and years and years. And that's something that John in the book of Revelation is actually keying in on. Does anyone remember where the beast comes from? The beast comes from the waters, comes from the oceans, comes from the sea. Yeah, right? The sea is where all the big, evil, scary things come from. And that is what God is talking about when he is talking about Leviathan. It's the thing that you cannot control. It's the thing that you are the most scared of. That thing that you're most scared of in your life, the Leviathan is the storm. Leviathan is your cancer, your sickness. Leviathan is your ex-wife. Leviathan is... Leviathan... Shouldn't have said that, sorry. Leviathan is that thing that you're most scared of. Leviathan is that death of a loved one, right? And God is basically saying, you don't have any control over him, Job. Can you make a pet out of him? Can you give him as a pet to your girls? I had a picture of an artist rendering of Leviathan. Very serpent-like, right? We should be thinking serpent-like, Genesis chapter 3, all kinds of things when we're thinking of Leviathan. But my favorite quote, this is Job 41, 1 and 5. Can you draw out Leviathan with a fishhook or press down his tongue with a cord? Can you catch him? No. And then verse 5 is my favorite one. Can you play with him as with a bird? I made a joke during Sunday school. I won't make it here. Those in Sunday school are like, yeah, appreciate that. But can you play with him like you play like a bird in a little cage, right? Or can you put a leash on him and give him to your girls? Can you make a pet out of him and give him to your girls as a pet? No, you can't, Job. But that's what I do. That's what I do. Your perspective is limited, and God implies that he can do it. And as big and scary as Leviathan is, as big and scary as those things are in your life, God is bigger. He's bigger than the adversary. He's bigger than Satan. He's bigger than your cancer. He's bigger than your ex-wife. He's bigger than death itself. He's bigger than your job. He's bigger than your desire to be like God and exist in the center of the Garden of Eden. He's bigger than that storm that surrounds your life and your suffering, than those thoughts of the waves just never stopping to cascade over you. He's bigger than it all. so much so that he can take all those things that you cannot even comprehend and are way too big for you, and he keeps it as a pet and gives it to his girls. And God always, we see, is working through storms. Like that our gospel lesson, Jesus was asleep in the middle of a storm. And the disciples are like, "We are dying, Jesus. Why are you sleeping?" But that wasn't the only storm where God worked. Because when Jesus was on the cross, it got very dark on Calvary. It says that the storm came in the midst. And when it comes to that storm, our perspective is also limited. We see just a man on a cross dying in the midst of a storm. But as the sky turns black, it looks like our perspective is limited. It looks like Leviathan has won. Our deepest fears have won. That God himself is dead. But 3 days later, he realized just how limited we are. That God's perspective is bigger than even Leviathan's. He can bring Leviathan as a pet home for his girls. So he came bursting forth from the grave for you and just pours life into your suffering. Shows us what true hope is in the midst of the storm, that he's a living Redeemer. So the point to end all this. So as the storms in your life, as the Leviathans surround you, don't lose heart. God is in control. Jesus is bigger. Our perspective is limited, but God's isn't. He has conquered your suffering with his life, and he brings you up out of the dangerous waters to make you live, to give you his resurrection. And that's really, really good news. And next week, we will tie up in a nice, uneven, ugly bow what Job is, the end of the book. And it's really cool. Let us pray. Jesus, we thank and praise you that you love us. God, we thank you that even though our perspective is limited and we don't have a full grasp and understanding of everything around us, that you are there and you're bigger and you're in control of it all. Lord, when our life just doesn't seem to make sense, Lord, help us to be calm and rest in you. Lord, help us to see our lives are like the lilies of the field, that they don't worry about where their stuff's going to come from, but Lord, you clothe them so beautifully. Let us be clothed by you, Father. Thank you, Jesus, that you have defeated Leviathan and defeated death. Amen.